The pursuit of the American dream draws people from all over the world to New York. With its iconic beacon, the Statue of Liberty, and its soaring towers, to many the city is an embodiment of the dream itself. It inspires a boy from Malaysia.
He always used to say, I love to go to New York. And I told him it's a faraway place, but he said, yeah, but maybe one day I might get there, you know.
It attracts a businessman from France.
These towers, because of their boldness, embodied for me a part of my American dream.
And a personal assistant from Britain.
I was lucky enough to live opposite. One view was of the Statue of Liberty in the harbour, beautiful, and the other side was my office, the World Trade Centers. I was just the happiest, the luckiest girl in the whole world.
But on 9/11, the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers turns the dream into a nightmare.
I remember saying it's coming down, and then I heard some people going, it's collapsing, and they're screaming. And so we started running. I couldn't believe my eyes.
The death of almost 3,000 men and women on 9/11 sears a lasting scar into a country, a city, and individual people from all over the world. Their sons and daughters, wives and husbands came here seeking a new life, a new hope, a new dream of the future. New York is a formidable city of skyscrapers, and its sheer scale and grandeur always make a huge impact on immigrants. To a boy arriving with his parents from an impoverished Ecuador in the early 60s, it all seems like a fantasy world.
It was at night that time, and I saw the skyscrapers all lit up. And I remember thinking it was like a city out of space. I remember reading some magazines, the comic books, and these views of this city. And I remember, looking at these huge skyscrapers.
When Kazu Sada and Mari Sumiyama's first son is born in 1967, it seems at first that Yoichi will observe family tradition and follow in his father's footsteps.
Here is Yoichi at elementary school.
This school was attended by Yoichi's grandfather and his father. Yoichi was the third generation in our family to be accepted.
I think my father was the happiest of all.
He was elated. Selection was done by random draw. It's a miracle that all three of you were able to get in.
The bond between father and son grew stronger as Yoichi grew up. But Yoichi's spirit of adventure will soon take him far away from home.
The first time I went skiing with Yoichi was when he was 3 years old. It was his first time, so I put him on the front of my skis and we skied down the hill together, with me supporting him as I went.
In New York, the construction of the new World Trade Center towers begins in 1966. Gradually, the towers rise into the Manhattan skyline. Using revolutionary building methods, the Twin Towers became the tallest buildings in the world when they were completed in 1973. New York now has a new symbol, proclaiming it as the city of the world. To a small boy growing up in Malaysia, it is an irresistible attraction.
This globe, it's wonderful memories we have of this globe. When he's a little boy, he loves traveling, He always talks about traveling. So we bought this globe so we could actually see the countries and the places he would love to visit. So we used to have fun. Actually, I used to have fun because I used to ask him the capital cities and he would swirl it around and say, there, I got it right.
Shankar's education and personal development is encouraged by Raji Navaratnam and her husband. And as he grows older, his fascination with New York grows stronger.
He always loved New York is because he says New York is the city of the world. And he says there is what you can get everything you want in the world.
The proud reputation of the firefighter as a working-class hero is something Alfredo Fuentes, the boy from Ecuador, discovers while growing up in Queens, where his parents are struggling to make ends meet.
I do remember one night I hear the sirens running, and it was the fire department. The two firemen start climbing up the ladder with all their gear on it, axes and everything, and then a couple of minutes later, you see them carrying a woman out. And it turned out so positive that I said, I wouldn't mind being a fireman. I kept thinking, un bombero. I said, ¿qué quiero ser un bombero?
In 1978, a television antenna is installed on the North Tower of the World Trade Center, making it instantly recognizable. The towers had become a thriving international business center, and their iconic status as the modern symbol of New York firmly established. When new immigrants Salim Hamdani and his wife Talat come to New York in the late 70s, a Muslim couple from Pakistan proudly photograph each other with the World Trade Center in the background. But very soon, the new Americans have to fight prejudice against their son Salman, who was bullied at school because of his religion.
My husband decided that he should go into karate to learn self-defense, and he did very well in it, extremely well. In 6 months, he was breaking a pile of bricks with his hand and, fly kicking.
As Salman grows up, he embraces the values of his adopted country. He wants to be an all-American boy.
He was, teaching me the American way of life. He was a Star Wars fan, so one day I asked him, what is Star Wars? Mama, you don't know Star Wars? You are not an American then. You have to read, you have to know the Star Wars.
The American dream also attracts undocumented workers hoping to escape from an impoverished life, like Luis Chimbo and his family from Ecuador. But life in New York proves to be a huge struggle, and they are forced to share a home with 2 other families. When their son comes home from school with a project to draw a floor plan of their family home, his mother Anna goes for the dream and not the reality.
I said, we are going to make a little light, but it's just a little tiny light. We're just going to make believe that we have a big place. And he said, okay. And I was telling him that we are going to have the living room, the dining room, the big kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. One for you and one for your dad and me.
Yelena Belilovsky leaves the Ukraine with her husband Boris and son Eugene in 1993. Because of anti-Semitism, they see no future in their home country. America seems like the land of opportunity.
We were excited that everything was going to happen, and we just understood that we have to work very hard. People who were already here, they were sending letters and telling us, you have to work. In the United States, everybody can become whatever they want to become. Just try hard, work hard, and everything will be, all your dreams will come true.
Kazusada and Mari Sumiyama watch their son Yoichi grow up embracing a different world. Yoichi meets his wife Harumi at university. For their honeymoon, they go skiing in Canada. Harumi always knew Yoichi was dreaming of another world.
Ever since I first met Yoichi, I always respected the unrelenting way he would work towards making his dreams a reality. He was incredibly hard-working.
Also dreaming of another world and about to leave his family home in Malaysia, his only son Vijayashankar Paramsothi. After he finishes school, his first choice of university is New York. His parents happily invest their life savings to pay for his fees.
It took me about 22 years of my life to earn that money to send him to New York. I worked hard, and I have no regrets about that, because whatever I have is, at the end of the day, is for him.
The power of the American dream also extends to Sydney, where a new generation of Australian students are about to embark on a career. When Stephen Thompson graduated with first-class honours in computer science from Sydney University, his parents know the attraction to leave Australia will be great.
He came home one day and he said, they want us to go to the States for a few weeks to set up some new system. And I thought, that sounds like an interesting experience.
For Stephen, New York offers tremendous opportunities, and he stays.
He rang us once a week. The first few times when he rang, I'd be trying to sort of think of important things to say because this is his once. After a while, I relaxed and we could just chat. But that phone call from Steve every week was the highlight of our lives.
Stephen falls in love with New Yorker Dory, and they marry in 1989. When baby Emily is born 2 years later, one of the first things they do is travel to Sydney to introduce Emily to the Australian side of the family.
Stephen would always say that when we were leaving, that it was good to be going, but sad to be leaving. Because it was good to be going home, but it was sad to be leaving his home. So we really felt that Australia and here were all of our homes.
But one man who had no desire to bring up a family in New York is Canadian Ken Basnicki. Despite many business connections with the United States, Ken prefers to build his dream home for his wife Maureen and his family near Toronto.
Here's Maureen, and Maureen's going to walk up to the front of the house. And we haven't got any stairs as yet. And that's our front entranceway, and we're going to go and have a quick tour.
Back in 1999, Ken decided that he wanted to build our dream home. He called it the Millennium Project. And it was our plan that we built the home big enough so that our son and daughter both had their own rooms and rooms for all their friends that they're going to bring, that we could still carry on family playtime, weekend time, because it's a place that they'd want to visit.
New York doesn't immediately appeal to everyone who goes to live there. When Bruno Dellinger arrives from France in 1997 to set up a business, he couldn't understand what all the fuss was about.
When I first arrived in New York, I just hated the city. I don't know why. It was just too big, too sprawling. Everything was way too fast. People were too blunt. It took me a year and a half to get to liking it. But from the moment I discovered how to do things in New York, I just fell in love with the city. Very quickly it became my city. I became a New Yorker.
Je suis devenu un New-Yorkais.
When Bruno moves his company offices to the 47th floor of the North Tower, he feels like he's arrived.
Something about the towers moved me a lot. Without a doubt, these towers with their gigantic scale, because of their boldness and the beauty of their gestures, embodied for me by the way they were rising out of the island of Manhattan, a part of my American dream.
In 2000, Vijaya Shankar Paramsothi gets a job at the Aon Corporation on the 103rd floor of the South Tower. It's a dream come true, which his mother shares with him.
He said, it's wonderful, he said, wonderful going up the elevator, actually being in that building. Every day was like, you know, we did this in the office, we did that in the office, and things like that. Through his eyes, I was able to visualize, okay, now Shankar is going here, Shankar is watching from the window, so what is he doing, and things like that, you know.
By the summer of 2001, Yelena Belalovsky has worked her way up to become Assistant Vice President of Fred Alger Management on the 93rd floor of the North Tower. It's a huge achievement for a mother who'd arrived from the Ukraine, speaking very little English.
She was very happy. She started working even more hard, that seeing that people are value what she is doing, especially this promotion and bonuses, and all people liked her.
Also making his way up in the world is undocumented worker Louis Chimbo. He lands a job at the Windows on the World restaurant, a haven for hard-working immigrants. Now he and his wife Anna can start dreaming of a good education for their son.
My husband and I were thinking that first years of his school, 5 or 6 years, it's going to be in a public school. But then we were planning to put him to study in a private school, Catholic school. That's what we were thinking about. But we knew at the same time that it's going to be expensive.
For Harumi Sugiyama, moving to New York at first seems difficult when her husband Yoichi gets his dream job at Fuji Bank on the 80th floor of the South Tower. Living in New Jersey with 2 small children takes some getting used to. But they're now settling in and have high hopes for the future.
In April, spring arrived, and New York suddenly became a sea of green. I discovered many new places. I began thinking that when next winter came around, that we would have so many places that we could go to as a family and could enjoy with the children. Just at this point, that fateful September arrived.
In September 2001, with bright sunshine and crystalline skies, New York seems poised for a peaceful autumn. But the events of 9/11 will turn the American dream into a nightmare and topple the lives of everyone connected to the World Trade Center into darkness and chaos. In early September 2001, New Yorkers are getting back to work after their summer holidays. At the World Trade Center, home to some of the world's leading financial institutions, many of the 50,000 people who work here are returning to their offices. One of them, a personal assistant from Britain, is just starting a new job at Eurobrokers on the 84th floor of the South Tower. She is Janice Brooks.
I was lucky enough to live opposite the World Trade Center. One view was of the Statue of Liberty in the harbour, beautiful, and the other side was my office, the World Trade Centers. I was just the happiest, luckiest girl in the whole world.
From the 106th and 107th floors of the North Tower, the Windows on the World restaurant offers spectacular views of the Statue of Liberty. Louis Chimbo from Ecuador has just been promoted to a new job managing the receiving department of the restaurant.
He was so happy to work there, you know, and I work in heaven. I said, why? Why did you say that? You know, because when it's a cloudy day, you just go up there, you just see clouds. You don't see the city. So it's like a heaven. And I knew he was very happy. He was very happy working there.
On Sunday, the 9th of September, Canadian Ken Basnicki is in New York for an important business meeting. It's scheduled for the morning of 9/11. He decides to call his family at home.
He didn't have a chance to say goodbye to Brennan, our son, so he actually called on the Sunday evening. And he called him from Windows of the World. And he said, I'm on top of the world. I'm at a restaurant called Windows of the World. Wow, you should see this place. It's really quite a view.
On Monday evening, the 10th of September, Vijaya Shankar Paramsothi is returning to New York after a short break in Europe. He's planning an early start on 9/11 at his job for the Aon Corporation in the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Before going to bed, he decides to call his mother in Malaysia.
It was 6:30 in the morning when he called me, and for him was 6:30 in the evening. And he said, you know, tomorrow I have to go in early, and I'm really tired today. So I said, all right, then we won't have a long chat. Why don't you go to bed? And I always end the conversation with saying, okay, I'll speak to you soon. But I didn't do that this time. And I was thinking, after I hung up, I said, hey, why didn't I say that to him? So I said, I'm going to ring him back and tell him that. Then I said, no, the poor child, he just told me he's tired. And he has to go to work early in the morning, so let him sleep, I said.
September the 11th dawns as a beautiful, though quite routine morning. Yoichi Sugiyama sets out from his home in New Jersey at 7 o'clock to be at his desk at the Fuji Bank in the South Tower for an early start. Harumi Sugiyama is at home with their 2 young boys. She's expecting their 3rd child.
My morning sickness was drawing to an end, so that morning I was feeling a bit queasy. But other than that, I saw Yoichi off for work, as I did every day. It was a typical morning, just like any other day.
Ozzie Stephen Tomset is due to attend an important business meeting at Windows on the World that morning. Though he normally dresses informally for his job as a computer company executive, that morning he's wearing a suit.
Stephen had a suit on, and I asked him if he was going to see a client, and he said no, he was going to a conference. And he was running a bit late for the train, and he kissed Emily on the top of her head, and he started to run out the door, and I said, hey, what about me? And he ran back in, and he kissed me, and he ran out again.
It's 8:45 a.m., and around 14,000 office workers have arrived at the World Trade Center. Bruno Dellinger is in his office on the 47th floor of the South Tower and about to start work.
I just turned on my computer and I was looking at my emails. And as I was looking at my emails, I heard an incredible noise. And I remember it took at least a minute for one of my employees to come from her office into mine, because the tower was shaking so badly. I had to hold Suzanne by her shoulders because I was afraid she might fall over.
First reports coming from the World Trade Center suggest a light aircraft has accidentally crashed into the North Tower. Firefighter Captain Al Fuentes is at his desk in Brooklyn when he receives the puzzling news.
A plane just hit the North Tower. And I said, impossible. I said, you know, on a day like this, visibility was miles. But I go right up to my 2 big windows and I could see, and I go, oh my God, boom. I see the North Tower fully engulfed with flame and dark beige, petroleum-based smoke coming out.
Within minutes, the first emergency services are arriving at the World Trade Center, not knowing what to expect. In her office on the 84th floor of the South Tower, Janice Brooks calls the Eurobrokers London office to assure them they're okay.
Just to let you know, we're all okay. Something's happening next door, but we're leaving. He was just incredulous on the phone. Something's happening next door. Oh my God, Janice, a plane's gone into the building. Get out. As I'm running through the dealing room, I'm saying, come on, we have to go, we have to go. And I looked at Brian, and Brian said, look, you know, we're going to stay. If you want to stay, just stay away from the windows. And at that point, I don't think I knew what I was doing. Dan looked at me and smiled, and I just kind of like, I can close my eyes and see it now, and it's almost like in slow motion. I'm like the $1 Million Man. I'm running through and looking at them, and he's smiling at me, but I'm carrying on running.
Images of the stricken North Tower become an instant news story. Boris Belilovsky is driving to work when he hears the news on his car radio. He'd taken his wife Yelena to the train station earlier that morning as usual to get to her job on the 93rd floor of the North Tower. The fact that this is the tower that's hit immediately worried Boris.
Immediately something like jumped inside me, and I decided, no, I have to stop and I have to call her because it's something going to be very unusual and strange. And I am started calling her, and the phone was ringing with no answer. All lines were busy at her job.
Watching the events unfold at home on TV is Dory Thompson, whose husband Stephen is scheduled to be at a business meeting in Windows on the World.
I emailed him, and he emailed me back, and he said, in the World Trade Center, above the problem. I asked him to keep in touch with me because I was frantic, and he sent me one message that said, staying still under instruction, and then another one that said, watch CNN, need updates.
By now, the news story of the World Trade Center incident is looking more and more serious. All over the world, people are glued to their TV screens. It was 10 p.m. in Tokyo, and the Sumiyama family are watching the evening news.
The first thing we saw was a picture of a burning building. And then we heard the newscaster say that the world's tallest building was on fire.
I saw it as an image, not part of the real world. Even though I couldn't link it to reality, I brought myself to call Harumi in New York.
I said to my mother-in-law, "Don't worry, Yoichi works in the other tower, not the one with the hole in it. It's okay, it's okay." And just as I uttered these words, we watched as the second plane crashed into the South Tower.
Maureen Basnicki is unaware of what's happening until she turns on the TV.
I turned on the TV just as the second plane was hitting the second tower. Well, you can only imagine as a flight attendant my horror. Planes just don't fly into buildings. So that grabbed me. But when I thought about it, wait a minute, World Trade Center. That's where Ken is.
It's just after 9 p.m. in the evening in Malaysia when the second plane plows into the South Tower.
I switched on the telly. I just couldn't believe what I saw. And I just froze, I couldn't do anything. And then what I did was, I called his home, I dialed the number at his home, and it was ringing, but he didn't pick up. So I dialed the mobile number, and he didn't pick up either. But I did call the office. It rang, but nobody picked up. So I thought Shankar had escaped. He's not there, he's fine. So I was glad in a way, but at the same time, there was an anxiety, This way!
After the second plane hits, panic spreads as people try to get away from the area. Bruno Dellinger, who's been reluctant to leave his office in the North Tower, now decides to get out.
All the time I was going down the stairs, I was in denial of what was going on, because subconsciously, I think I knew I was in serious danger. But like all the people in the staircase, I said to myself, no, it's not serious. We'll be able to get out.
Outside in the streets, the situation is escalating into a major emergency.
It's Lee. Just tell Mama I'm okay. Just remember we can.
A call goes out to all emergency services to report for duty. Many first responders are heading for the World Trade Center from all over the city. Talat Hamdani knew her son Salman would be one of them.
He was the type he would respond. And he was a first responder. He was a certified first responder. He worked with Metro Ambulance Company for more than a year. And that was his call of duty. When you're trained as a first responder, you respond to the situation, even if no call, but that their call did go out for all the first responders to go and help over there.
When the firefighters arrive at the World Trade Center, New York's bravest are confronted with a high-rise fire of a different order to anything ever seen in the city before. The central core of the North Tower, which houses the elevator shafts and emergency stairwells, has been severed. Those above the impact zone are trapped in a blazing inferno.
I knew we were up against something that we never ever seen before. And I heard this explosion, and I'm looking. I said, "Geez, what's that? Bombs going off?" And I kept looking. And then as I looked up again, and it was a body, and the body's flying, and hitting the sidewalk and exploding. And I went, "My God!" And it gave me such an urgency that we had to get in there and do what we had to do to help these poor civilians.
Anna Soria watches the news with growing horror. Her husband Louis works in the windows on the World Complex above the impact zone. She realizes he's trapped.
I was so desperate, and I didn't know what to do. I was looking for his clothes. I remember I took a shirt that he was wearing the day before. I felt his perfume. And I was just praying, I said, "God, please, don't let nothing happen to him, please."
For Harumi Sugiyama, watching everything live on TV, the impact zone of the second plane seems perilously close to where her husband Yoichi would be in the Fuji Bank offices between the 79th and 82nd floor.
It looked as if the second plane had hit the tower in the middle at about the 60th floor. I was convinced Yoichi was unharmed because his offices were higher up in the building. I stared at the screen and said, "Run, run, just get out safely."
Yoichi's father is watching in Tokyo. To him, the situation looks even more serious.
Unable to sit down, I stood up, my legs shaking uncontrollably. I still couldn't believe that my son was in the exact same building that had just been hit. I just couldn't imagine it.
But the catastrophe at the World Trade Center is about to get a lot worse. As the huge emergency and security operation at the World Trade Center starts to take effect, New York is grinding to a halt. Boris Belilovsky watches the events unfold while he's at work. He just doesn't know what to do.
I felt myself helpless. Of course, it was feeling of panic, and I just thinking, just running this on my mind, wondering faster, 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 escape from that place. And every moment, being in my office, I was feeling that I have to go and help her in some way, but I just didn't understand how can I do this.
News of the escalating emergency at the World Trade Center is beamed across the globe. In Malaysia, Raji is trying hard to remain optimistic.
I was just glued to the TV, and I was trying, "Shankar, please call me, please call me." Just hoping the phone will ring and I'll hear Shankar's voice, but I didn't. Waited and waited, there was no call from him. Then it hit me, something could have happened, because why didn't Shankar call me back? He knows I'll be worried, but why is that he didn't call me back? I know his first thought would be, my mother will be worried. That's him, that's him.
Maureen Besnicki has received no news from her husband, so she calls his mother in Toronto to find out if she has heard anything.
I knew he would call, and he did call. And he said, "Mom," apparently in a very calm voice, I'm in New York. I'm on the 106th floor. Windows of the world. The room is full of smoke, and the roof is blocked. And I don't know how I'm going to get out. Phones went dead. So, his mother was the last person to hear from him. 106th floor is referred to as the jumper floor. It was so horrific that people made that choice.
When I saw that there were people on the windows, maybe one of them is my husband, but who can help? Who can help? The helicopters, they're just getting to the top of the tower. Oh my God. I was saying, God, where are you? Please help them. They can do anything. Why? Why is this happening?
When Janice Brooks makes it out of the South Tower, having walked down the emergency stairs from the 84th floor, she is astonished by the scale of the disaster.
People were just standing there and looking up at the building, wondering what on earth had happened. And I just remember just bursting into tears. Where our floor should have been was this huge gaping hole. And all you could see was flames. And the worst thing I thought about the people that I'd last seen on the floor.
In the streets around the World Trade Center, the atmosphere is anxious, tense. As office workers move away from the impact zone, Bruno Dellinger finally makes it down from the 47th floor of the North Tower.
I'm on the sidewalk, and I turn around and I see tower number 1 in flames. It broke my heart. I walked 5 meters. I couldn't believe it. I turned around for a second time.
Then at 9:59 a.m., the South Tower unexpectedly collapses. Captain Alfuentes, along with hundreds of other firefighters, are in the danger zone.
I remember saying it's coming down, and then I heard some people going, it's collapsing, and they're screaming. And so we started running. It was like a freight train. It was just, and it was right next to me. It was just, it was just massive.
This monster came towards me, spreading out its tentacles. I said to myself, what am I going to do? Shall I run or shall I stay? Time seemed to go by very slowly. I just took a deep breath and I was inside it. Everything turned black. Blacker than the night.
I realized, I think we survived, but we couldn't breathe. I take my bunker gear and I'm trying to get whatever air I can get from my bunker gear. It was a little lighter, a little clearer, but I couldn't believe my eyes. Everything was on fire. There was debris of, 10, 15 feet mounds. It was just incredible.
Anna Soria watches the collapse of the South Tower in horror. She dreads what will happen next to the tower still standing, knowing that her husband is trapped near the top of it, in the windows on the World Restaurant.
I saw the tower collapse, and I was saying no. And I was just saying, please, that could be a nightmare, and I just want to wake up.
As Boris Belilovsky watches the endless replays of the collapse of the South Tower on television, he too fears for his wife trapped in the remaining tower.
Every moment I was thinking that she will call right now, she will call right now, but nobody called, the phone was quiet. It was kind of, it's something happening, but it's happening not with me, with somebody else. I just couldn't imagine that that can happen to me.
At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower also collapses. For Janice Brooks, who just made it to her apartment opposite the World Trade Center, the nightmare continues.
It was just like a noise I'd never heard before. There was a low rumble, and then a kind of tuk, 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 obviously as the floors were hitting each other as the building was falling down. Then there was an almighty crash. This black cloud appeared, and I had windows all the way around, and just one by one, the windows were covered in black, and it just rolled around. And it was black, dark. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face.
Having survived the collapse of the first tower, Captain Alfuentes is caught up in the collapse of the second. This time, he's not so lucky.
I couldn't see daylight, you know, and I was giving the transmission to my remote handy talkie, and I'm talking, and I was obviously in and out of consciousness. And the first transmission, I remember saying, "This is Captain Fuentes, we're trapped. I have a lot of people with me, we need help. And we need this beam to be pulled off us, we need help."
Bruno Dellinger is also in the danger zone after narrowly escaping death when both the towers fall. Dazed and confused, he finds himself on the streets and decides to walk back to his apartment.
It was like this much. I don't know. I was walking in a kind of snow for hundreds of meters. I got close to my home, and as if by magic, a phone call went through to my parents, and I was through to my mother. Everything I'd been keeping inside myself came out. After the immense trauma and terror that these events had caused me, it was the tenderness of parents, feeling that they were also upset, that they loved me.
Considering the numbers of patients that are coming to us and the speed at which they're coming to us, we know...
News of the collapse of the Twin Towers is received in disbelief all over New York and beamed across the world.
At the same time, I have to say that the fire department... The towers are gone. Church Street is littered with people still lingering. The scene here is reminiscent of a nuclear winter. There is dust in the street.
Let's go to
Both towers collapsed.
Dory Thompson now knows that it's time to call her husband Stephen's family in Australia.
I called my brother-in-law Jeff. It was 4:30 in the morning in Australia, and I told him. You know, I just remember saying to Jeff, "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this. I'm so sorry." But it was important that they knew right away. I didn't want Stephen's parents to be alone when they got the news. So that's why I told my brother-in-law. And I knew he would take care of it.
We came out into the dining room, and I had the television there, and they said, "It's all over the telly." I said, "We turned on." And one or other of them said, "It's horrible, Mum." I said, "We've got to see it." So they turned the television on. I don't know that I cried very much then at all. I think perhaps I was in shock. Now I can view it without falling apart. And I don't know that I ever fell apart. I'm not a real fall apart sort of person.
In New York, thousands of office workers make their way home early after being evacuated from Manhattan. Schools close early too, so the parents can be reunited with their worried children. Anna Soria dreaded her son Louis would be coming home soon, wanting to know what has happened to his dad.
I started to think, what am I going to tell my son? How am I going to explain him about what happened with his dad?
My school was around 15 blocks away from my house, and I took off, ran. I can only remember from that being the longest run ever. Trees just flashing by me, only leaves, on my way to go see my mom.
He came and he just saw me that I was with his dad's shirt on my arm and holding the phone. And he said, "Mommy, what happened with Daddy?"
It is immediately apparent that the catastrophic collapse of the towers could have killed thousands. But as soon as the dust clears, a search and rescue operation is mounted to find any survivors. Captain Alfuentes is buried alive underneath rubble and steel girders for 2 hours. Then a firefighter hears Fuentes' radio and crawls under the rubble to investigate.
He says, "I got somebody here," and he started yelling, and I answered him. It took a little while. They had to get the beam off me. They had to get a couple of things off me. They extricated me, and they called for a Stokes basket, and they put me on a Stokes. I was somewhat talking. One guy kept his hand on my scalp, pushing it over. They thought I wasn't going to make it.
Alfuentes becomes one of the many victims with life-threatening injuries caused by falling debris, burning jet fuel, and smoke inhalation. On arrival at the Jersey City Medical Center, Fuentes is given the last rites, and the hospital called his wife Eileen to tell her that her husband is not expected to live.
The cut or wound started right here, and it just came around his whole head all the way to the back. And I guess they had, he wore his hair short, but they had shaved that part of his head. And, it was about this thick. I mean, it was just such a deep gash. And he really looked scalped. And I was watching them, as they were suturing him, and, they had him on all the machines, and I was so grateful that he was there and he was alive. I didn't care what was wrong with him. I saw that the machines were making noise.
There are huge delays for those who have to travel long distances home on 9/11. Train services are suspended and bridges and tunnels closed. This gives hope to relatives who'd heard nothing from their loved ones. Harumi Sugiyama convinces herself that her husband Yoichi is still on his way home.
I was convinced Yoichi had escaped to somewhere. Was unable to contact us. But that at some point he would call us. He would definitely come back home. That's what I thought at the time.
Talat Hamdani knew her son Salman was likely to be one of the first responders at the World Trade Center, but she'd heard nothing at all from him and is beside herself with worry.
When he didn't come home all night and we didn't even receive a phone call from him, then I got very worried, The hope was, so long as he's alive, it didn't matter where he was. Even if he couldn't talk or couldn't walk, I wanted to believe he's alive.
In In the frantic search for survivors over the next few days, there's still a faint glimmer of hope that someone might be found alive amidst the death and destruction in what is now being called Ground Zero. The scale of the destruction left by the collapse of the Twin Towers is unimaginable. It's clear the death toll will be very high. The chances of surviving the avalanche of steel and concrete slim. Then, on day one, 14 survivors are miraculously rescued from a collapsed stairwell. This initially gave hope to those awaiting news of their loved ones.
In our mind, in ourselves, we always thought that Shankar was alive somewhere, because he is capable. So we had hope. But that hope diminished day after day.
To New Yorkers, the smoke rising above the city skyline is a constant reminder of a terrible loss. The idea of returning to normality seemed impossible to Boris Belilovsky. He's received no news of his wife, Yelena, who was at work in the North Tower when the tragedy unfolded.
Coming home every day, it was absolutely awful. It was empty house. It wasn't all these warmth which she was bringing every day, coming home. Everything was gone. Eugene was asking me all the time, where is Mom? Did she found her? Did they found her? And I couldn't tell him anything.
Talat Hamdani joined hundreds of others wandering around Manhattan, desperately trying to find news of their missing loved ones.
I'm looking for my son, Sal. He left home that morning and he hasn't called back since then. If anybody has seen him, most probably he's helping people.
But within this public sharing of sorrow, there are glimpses of racial suspicion and hatred, especially towards Muslims living in New York.
I put up posters of Salman around the block. And when I went out, like a couple of hours later, they were all gone. They were ripped off. So I was in such a bad state of mind that at that time it did not hit that someone had pulled them down, because I had placed them on all the trees and they were all gone.
As soon as the ferry service from New Jersey began again shortly after 9/11, Harumi Sugiyama decided to go to Manhattan to look for her husband, who still hadn't come home since leaving for his job at the Fuji Bank in the South Tower early in the morning of 9/11. Before leaving, she made a promise to her children.
I promised the children, Mummy is going to find Daddy and bring him back home. And I boarded the ferry. It was the first time I had crossed over to Manhattan since the attacks. In New Jersey, it was so peaceful that it was hard to believe such a tragedy had taken place across the waters. The only visible sign of the attacks from the ferry terminal was the gap in the skyline where the towers once stood, and the black smoke which now arose in their place. When I saw that, it became very real for me.
It's day 3 of the round-the-clock search and rescue operation at Ground Zero, and no more survivors had been found since the second day. Canadian Maureen Besnicki knew her husband had been trapped above the impact zone when the North Tower collapsed.
There was much optimism that there would be survivors, certainly from the family members. And I know all the time that I was watching the television and you couldn't take me away from the TV. I knew in my heart that Ken was dead. It was extremely difficult. There were times that I thought I couldn't deal with the pain.
Anna Soria's been waiting day and night for news of her husband Louis. Anna suspects he was one of the people trapped at the top of the North Tower when it collapsed. She now realizes she will have to prepare her 12-year-old son for the worst.
I said, it's already 5 days, Papi. And we didn't hear anything from Daddy. I just wanted to ask you to be strong, just in case Daddy's not coming back. And it's going to be only the two of us.
I didn't feel that emotional kind of wave hit me straight through at the beginning because I wanted to be that support for my mother. I tried to be as much as a buffer to her as possible. I've tried to do that since then. So since that day, it's constantly been myself trying to be a huge support for her.
5 days after 9/11, the Sumiyama family arrive in New York from Tokyo. They are desperate to get to Ground Zero and hope to join in the search for their lost son, Yoichi. They have no idea about the elaborate security measures in force.
We were not allowed near Ground Zero. If I could have gone, I would have searched for Yoichi with my own hands. I had even brought a mask and gloves with me, just in case.
I saw the smoke rising from the burnt ground. And that was the moment when it all became real for me. It was a sickening feeling.
Keep moving. Please keep moving, sir. Please keep moving. Please keep moving.
Raji Navaratnam and Param Sivapakayam aren't able to get to New York from their home in Malaysia until September the 18th. They've received no news of their son Shankar, who'd worked on the 103rd floor of the South Tower.
As we were walking along, I just wanted to appeal to one of those guys. They said, "Let me go, I'm the mother, my son is inside there." He's going to come out all covered in dust, and his glasses I know would have maybe broken or something of that sort, but he will come and say, "Ma, I'm here." And I was thinking, God, will you I believe in miracles, will you give me that chance, or will you give me that? No. As I kept walking away further and further, I said my chances were getting slimmer and slimmer. And I thought, are you going to come out, Shankar? Are you going to come out, Shankar? But no.
My birthday! And we're on our way to dinner with Grandma and Grandpa. They already went outside, but we want you to see how pretty Emily looks. And we're going out to dinner now.
To me. Happy birthday to me.
Stephen Thompson died on 9/11, trapped above the impact zone. His wife, Dori, was devastated, but she knew it was important to maintain the weekly phone calls to Stephen's parents in Australia.
It was a little while before I could talk to my mother-in-law on the phone because it was so hard for me. I was just crying all the time, and I didn't want to make it any worse for them than it already was. So Emily called them, and Emily talked to them.
Regular visits to Stephen's family in Australia were part of Emily's childhood. This home video shows her sitting to the right of her grandmother, Ray, in Christmas 2000.
Dori always made sure that Emily rang us, but she couldn't speak to us for a long time. Dori needed Emily enormously, and no doubt Emily needed Dori. Steve had been incredibly close to Emily. It was a lovely relationship.
It is a wonderful thing for me that she looks like him to me, and she has mannerisms, and she does things and says things, and other members of Stephen's family see that as well.
Sharing the grief of others, was becoming more and more difficult for Talat Hamdani. Anti-Muslim sentiment helped turn her son Salman's disappearance and death into a news story which tried to link him with the 9/11 terrorists.
It insinuated that, Salman actually did not die at the Twin Towers, but he's someone linked with the terrorist attacks, one of the terrorists. We lost a child, and we're searching for him, but instead of devoting our times and energies to search for him and try to come to terms with the harsh reality that indeed he did die over there, we had to defend his character and our faith that no, he was not a terrorist, and no, he was not linked with them. Yes, he was a Muslim. It's not a sin to be a Muslim.
There was grieving too for the loss of the Twin Towers. Bruno Dellinger from France loved his New York office in the South Tower, and its loss went deeper than he ever imagined.
Je suis sur l'autoroute qui rentre dans Manhattan.
I was on the highway into Manhattan.
On avance. Je conduis.
And I'm driving.
Et au fond de moi, je suis...
And deep down, I'm convinced I'm going to see these towers, that they will be there.
J'ai le cœur brisé.
My heart was broken.
Vraiment brisé.
Truly broken.
Et ce n'est pas quelque chose de...
And it wasn't something personal I'd lost. I don't care about that. I was never interested in money, really. Everything I've done has been for the beauty of it. I think a beautiful life is a successful life. What interested me in the World Trade Center was the harmony, the beauty, all gone.
2 weeks after 9/11, New York is getting back to a semblance of normality. Janice Brooks returned to new premises set up by Euro brokers after they lost their offices in the South Tower. Her new job was answering the phone at a help desk set up for the relatives of missing employees. One call upset her more than any other.
Dan Smith's sister used to call me, and she used to ring the help desk before she knew my name. She just said, I need to speak to the girl that saw Dan Smith last.
Janice last saw Dan and 2 other colleagues as she left her office and started going down the emergency stairs in the South Tower. Minutes later, the second plane crashed into their office, which was right in the middle of the impact zone.
I can remember the 3 of them almost in slow motion walking towards me and Dan smiling, and I just don't understand why I didn't say to him, come on Dan, let's go, come on, let's go. And because his sister was calling me to find out where did I think he went after I saw him, I just, to my eternal shame, I didn't stop and take a second to ask him to come with me.
Vijay Shankar Paramsothi was also close to the impact zone on his way down from the top of the South Tower when the plane hit. He was with his boss Howard and a group of colleagues. One of them told his parents what happened.
When the dust settled, and when she looked at Shankar, his dust covered all over him, and Howard was on the floor, it seems, and everybody was screaming and groaning, and Shankar she said he just dusted the dust off his body, went to Howard, and she said Shankar will not leave that place. She knows. He said, no, you go ahead. I'll find my way later, he said. So he was with Howard,
A few minutes later, the whole building collapsed. So we knew that they both went together. There was one consolation in us that he never went alone. He went with his best friend, his mentor, his surrogate father. They went together.
After around 2 weeks, any hope of finding survivors is gone. The aim of the emergency services is to recover and identify the dead. But with few of the remains identified, it is difficult to come to terms with the death of a loved one. So when Boris Belalovsky's rabbi suggested that the family hold a memorial service for his wife Yelena, they were shocked.
They still couldn't believe it, and I told him, we cannot have memorial service, we don't have a person, maybe person alive. How do we know that because memorial service, it's all about dead, but she's probably somewhere alive. And he told, okay, if she is alive, we will celebrate later, but now we have to have this as a tradition, and we have to have this memorial service.
As the search for bodies continues, death certificates would be issued to the families of the missing who had not yet been identified. The finality of this piece of paper triggered precious memories and profound regrets for the parents of Yoichi Sugiyama.
I remember the clear, beautiful weather on the day his birth certificate was issued. I remember the devastation I felt only 34 years later, as this time it was his death certificate.
Under normal circumstances, it is the funeral home and your own children who arrange your death certificate. But to have that role reversed, it was on this day that I first learnt the English word homicide.
New York became a city of funerals, as day by day it went into mourning to bury and honor its dead. While many of the 343 firefighters who lost their lives were given a hero's send-off, another heroic firefighter, Captain El Fuentes, was battling to stay alive. He'd been critically injured and in a coma, but after several weeks his wife Eileen saw some hopeful signs.
I remember he couldn't speak, but he could write things. His eyes would be rolling around in the back of his head from all of the medicine, and he'd come in and come out, and he would start to write, and I couldn't read what he was writing. And then I read it. I looked at one and I said, did he write prognosis? And he did. I said, and I would say it, like I would try to say to him what he had written, and I said, did you write prognosis?
Every life saved was a symbolic victory, helping New York to rise above its tragedy. But now, families from all over the world who had lost their loved ones had to cope with the deep emotional scars left by 9/11. Their search for new meaning would push many to the limits of endurance. The search for the American dream of a better life that brought Anna Soria and her family to New York seemed completely lost after her husband Louis, an undocumented worker, was killed on 9/11. Anna and her son had no money and no legal status in the United States. In desperation, she went to see a lawyer. Meeting Deborah Brown Steinberg would be a turning point for her and her son's future.
Do you remember showing me the missing poster? I remember it so well.
I know. I was holding this folder with all the information. I gathered all the papers that I needed, because they were saying that day all the papers got burned, and I needed to find some proof that he was there.
She didn't speak any English or very little English. I spoke absolutely no Spanish. I watched her, and a tear fell from her eye onto her husband's face. And she took her hand and she wiped her husband's face. I knew then that even though I couldn't speak to her, I understood her, and that I would do whatever I could to help her.
With Deborah's help, Anna and her husband's dream of a good education for their son Louis was kept alive.
I have my husband's pictures here in the dining room, and thinking and seeing his photo, and I was saying, you see, he's going to the school. You did it. And I'm just going to keep with your dreams. I'm just going to do my best. I know it's going to be hard, but I know that he will. He's a very smart kid, and I know that he deserves that.
After Vijaya Shankar Paramsothi died on 9/11, his parents brought back personal items from his apartment in New York to Malaysia and turned his old bedroom into a final resting place for his spirit. The idea of his death was so painful to his mother Raji, she surrounded herself with everything she'd kept from his childhood, right up to his last days in New York. Here, she feels closest to him.
This is one of his favorite shirts. Just like baby. And then this is his favorite jacket. I love this. I really love this. And I always run my hands through here like. I wanted to put the things back. I didn't want to create a museum. I wanted to have a room, create a room like what he had in New York, so that he can walk in and be comfortable in this room. Because I know he's going to follow me back home. So that's what I did. I brought it back, his things, and did all the things that he wanted. So anytime he walks in, it's his room.
Nearly a month after 9/11, one night at bedtime, Harumi Sugiyama decided to tell her children that their father would not be coming home, but that in death, he has turned into a star who they could always see and who would always be there for them. Together, they would look at the night sky to try and find him.
Tai Chi bounded up and said, "I think Daddy is that star over there." Seeing Tai Chi's spirits lifted, I agreed. "I think you're right. It must be that one."
A couple of days later, Tai Chi wrote a letter to his dad and left it on the balcony.
When Tai Chi wasn't there, I moved the letter. Soon after, Tai Chi noticed the letter was gone. He said, "It's gone. Daddy came to get it after all." I thought I shouldn't open the letter as it was addressed to Yoichi. When I held it up to the light, I could just about make out the word Dad, written in English.
Around 8 weeks on from 9/11, and Ground Zero had taken on the atmosphere of a mass burial ground. The remains of 542 bodies had been recovered. The firefighters suffered heavy losses, including their chaplain, Father Judge. Captain Alfuentes knew nothing of this. But when he began to regain consciousness, he needed to make sense of the recurring nightmares he was having.
I had the worst nightmare I've ever had when I woke up, and my wife was on a cot next to the bed. She was with me throughout, and I remember telling her, I said, "You got to call Father Judge. I'm going crazy." She goes, "What's the matter?" I go, "People are jumping. I'm just looking at people jumping. They're jumping. I'm going crazy."
I couldn't get the words out. I just looked at him. I just looked at him, and I started to cry, and he knew.
"Father Judge is dead?" And then a little tear came down in her eye, and then I let loose. I started crying.
He just started saying people's names, and I always remember I wanted to be able to say no, and he kept going through names, and I just kept shaking my head.
Bruno Dellinger survived the collapse of the World Trade Center physically unharmed, but was deeply traumatized by the experience. He was only able to continue with his life after writing in depth about what happened to him on the day of 9/11, expressing his hidden feelings of pain and grief.
L'écriture m'a sauvé la vie.
Writing saved my life.
Quand la tour s'est écroulée,
When the tower came down, I thought I was dead.
j'ai ouvert une grande boîte.
I opened a big box in my head, and I put all my emotions inside it.
Toutes les horreurs que j'ai vues.
All the horrors I saw. I put everything inside this box, so I could carry on
De
living.
manière à pouvoir continuer à fonctionner.
Getting back to normal also turned out to be much more difficult than survivor Janice Brooks ever imagined.
We had counsellors in the office for 6-12 months, just wandering around. How are you today, Janice? How are you feeling? That kind of thing. And of course, I was very English about it and said, no, I don't need counselling, fine, I'm all right, you know, stiff upper lip and all that. And after about 6 months, I'd hold my hands up and say, you know what, I can't deal with this anymore. I don't know what to do. I was so sure I could have handled it. I'm English, we have this stiff upper lip. And I felt like I was letting the Queen down. And I had to kind of say, okay, somebody please help me.
On the 11th of March 2002, the New York night sky was transformed by the switching on of the city's tribute in light to the fallen of 9/11. On the same night, Harumi Sugiyama gave birth to her third son, Soya. From her hospital bed, Harumi saw the lights rise up in the sky.
Watching the lights from Ground Zero, suddenly I felt the blood drain from my body. I told myself, this is it. I have to accept that the time had finally come. At the same time, Soya had been born, and it was like Yoichi was saying, it's okay. You can find me, I am here. And that's why I think his body was found.
3 weeks after the birth of their son, the remains of Harumi's husband Yoichi were identified. She contacted her father-in-law in Tokyo with the news.
Before going to New York, Harumi said that Yoichi would have preferred an extravagant case for his ashes. In Japan, we normally opt for a small, plain pot. Harumi chose this fine bronze case for us, and we've kept it ever since. I wanted to take Yoichi around the New York that he loved so much. I put the box of remains in a backpack. I took him to Battery Park, where the cherry blossoms were in full bloom. In Japan, cherry blossoms are very symbolic. We believe they represent the Japanese spirit. I stood there, looking at the blossoms, feeling lucky to be with my son during such a meaningful season.
6 months on from 9/11, over 12,000 body parts had been recovered from Ground Zero and stored in refrigerated trucks in an area that became known as Memorial Park. But still, only around 500 victims had been identified from their shattered remains. Then in March, there was a surge in identifications with the use of more sophisticated DNA matching methods. One of those identified was Salman Hamdani, and on the 20th of March 2002, his mother, Talat, received a visit.
2 officers came and they said, well, your son's remains have been confirmed through DNA. The next day we went down to the medical examiner's office and they had a big file on him and they told him his lower body was found in 34 pieces.
The confirmation of Salman's death was a severe blow to Talat and her husband Salim.
Since the day of 9/11, what Salim had done, he had started sleeping in the living room because the main entrance opened into the living room, and he said, you know, he was waiting for Salman. And he wouldn't lock his doors because Salman would not have a key when he came home. So when that happened, you know, the confirmation came, I think he just totally broke down.
Having fought hard to uphold the reputation of her son as a good American citizen, Talat took comfort from the hero's funeral he was given at the Manhattan Mosque. New York dignitaries and Salman's fellow cadets came to pay their tributes.
He was a Star Wars fan. Very proud American.
For the first time in 47 days, clear-up operations fell silent when on the 28th of October 2001, an interfaith memorial service was held at Ground Zero. For those whose loved ones died on 9/11, the site had become a place of pilgrimage. For Maureen Besnicki, whose husband was killed here, regular visits to New York from her home in Toronto took on huge emotional significance.
What compels me to come here is it is sacred ground at Ground Zero. I eventually did get DNA evidence, body parts. I got shipments, as a matter of fact. On 3 different occasions, I was told that a piece of clavicle was found, how much it weighed, whatever. It's very, very difficult to deal with. On all the death certificates that were received that day, it said homicide. That's the reality of the situation. I know people are
Since 2010, Maureen has worked as a volunteer guide at the Ground Zero Tribute Center.
I want to show you somebody very special. It's my late husband, Ken. That's his photo there on the motorbike. When I'm down here, I feel more able to speak to him, if you would. I don't often go to the cemetery where the body parts are buried. I feel closer to him and able to carry on a conversation here in New York.
In Malaysia, Param and Raji never received any remains of their son Shankar. But as a tribute to him and to his love of New York, they recreated a piece of America in his bedroom.
This flag is the flag of the honor. It's a flag of the honor where Shankar's name is here, Vijay Shankar Paramsodhi. And this flag was given by Aeon Corporation, where he worked. It is like a precious Aeon family, remembered, September 11, 2001.
I can't just bear to look at this to see where his name actually is, because even though I accepted that he's not here anymore, I still feel Shankar is with me. He's still with me, but I can't touch him, I can't feel him, but I feel his presence all the time. So here, if I look and I say, oh, you are here, then there is a definite spot I'm going to point, I can't accept that.
Mari Sumiyama also feels the presence of her lost son Yoichi, most of all when she plays the piano. This piece was specially composed by her husband in his memory.
I know it sounds strange, but sometimes when I play, I hear the sound of this key. There's no logical explanation for it, but I feel it is a sign from Yoichi. No matter how sad the song, when I hear that sound, I'm filled with warmth. It's a familiar feeling. I feel like my son is next to me.
We keep Yoichi's remains in the house, so we can feel his presence every day. Seeing the box every day is a constant reminder, which means the sadness never goes away. We couldn't bring ourselves to put him in a grave under the cold ground.
For Anna Surya, life got much better after first meeting lawyer Deborah Brown Steinberg. With Deborah's help, Anna's son Louis enjoyed a good education and is on the way to achieving her and her husband's American dream. But when Louis left home to go to college in 2007, Anna needed some reassurance from her husband.
I can see my husband in my dreams. That's the only place that I can talk to him, hug him, laugh with him. But I was crying in the dream, crying for my son that he's away. Then suddenly my husband said, Anna, please, don't worry. He's going to be okay because I'm going to take care of him. Now it's my turn.
Anna and Louis were now starting to enjoy the better life they'd dreamt of and that they thought they'd lost forever after 9/11. But still with no legal status in the United States, the dream, for both of them, could easily be broken. For those who narrowly escaped with their lives on 9/11, the death of many of their close friends and colleagues has come back to haunt them. Listening to the tape recordings of 9/11 radio messages, made public in August 2005, brought it all back to Captain El Fuentes, who had been hailed as a 9/11 hero.
The bravery that I've heard this morning, the bravery what I saw that day, but I heard it pretty thorough this morning, it's unequaled. I know who the heroes were. I witnessed them, you know. For somebody to put me in their class, wow. I mean, that's the American dream. I mean, you know, from this Spanish kid that couldn't speak the language, that was watching this fireman do this thing.
Harumi Sugiyama returned to Tokyo with her 3 children 1 year after 9/11. Like most 9/11 families, her home has special tributes to her husband Yoichi. Their youngest son, Soya, is now 10.
This is a photo of me when I was a baby in America.
My son Soya was born in America. He's got American citizenship. When I was pregnant with Soya, my husband said, when this child is born, he will be born in America. He'll be able to get American citizenship. Isn't that great?
In a cemetery in Westchester County, New York State, Boris Belalovsky has laid his wife Yelena to rest. On regular visits, Boris talks to Yelena about their dreams and how their son is doing.
Мы тебя любим. Нам очень тебя не хватает. Елена, we love you. We missed you. You can be proud of your son. Your dream, which you had all the time, all your life, coming true. He is in a great school. He is doing a great job. You can be very proud of him.
I'll always remember how much my mom loved me and how much she cared. Everything that she helped me with and encouraged me to, you know, to do my best. That's what I'll remember, and I'll remember how, you know, also how exceptional she was and that she was able to study at night, work during the day, and still find time in such a way that I didn't feel neglected to, you know, spend time with me and made me feel very loved. So I think that's what I'll remember the most.
Though she has 9/11 memorabilia and personal tributes to her husband Stephen in her home on Long Island, Dory Thompson never received any of his remains. Amongst the tributes to Stephen, their daughter Emily's school achievements take pride of place.
She was the valedictorian of her high school class, which means she was the #1 student in her class. And these are all various awards for mock trial, for writing, for math. And Stephen isn't here, and he went to participate in all of this, but I talk to him sometimes when I walk through here, and every time I hung up a new certificate, I'd say, Stephen, look at this. Emily won this. Isn't this amazing?
For Emily, following in her father's footsteps wasn't always easy.
Math has always been the thing I've cared about the most because it was what he was good at, and I've always wanted to, you know, be good at it too. And second semester last year, I took linear algebra, which was just so different, and I was just so like, whew. And it was very difficult for me because it was something new and it was something I'd never done before, and I didn't get it very easily. And so I had a lot of trouble because it was like, at times it felt like I was letting him down because I wasn't understanding it. And, you know, then I realized, like, no, that's silly. You know, he's always proud of me, and I do well and I try my best, and that's what matters.
Anna Soria is making a new life for herself in New York. She has just qualified as a pastry chef, and she is living the dream that first brought her and her husband to America.
I was just so surprised that I did it, and at the same time I was so happy because it was not easy, but not impossible.
Like Anna, her son Louis is realizing his own and his father's dreams. Louis is about to graduate from Syracuse University with a degree in art photography.
One of my projects that I have, it's an ongoing project, and I think it'll just be ongoing until I finally am able to visit my mom's homeland. I don't know if I can directly call it my homeland. I've never really been there. I can't remember. It's been a really long time. And my project consists of basically my mother, and it's sort of a tribute to her.
With the continued support of lawyer Deborah Brown Steinberg, both Louis and his mother are hoping to become US citizens. It will be the final step in the family's quest to achieve the American dream.
I'm glad where I am right now, and we're both good. I'm still by her side, but now I know that I don't have to be as strong as I was before, or as strong as I thought I was.
Janice Brooks moved back to England 5 years after 9/11. A special book commemorating her Eurobroker colleagues who died on 9/11 is a positive reminder of the friends Janice lost on that day.
It's not the best photograph of him, it must be said, but it's a lovely one. And it just shows what a genuine man he was. And he was a good friend.
Since 9/11, Bruno Dellinger has returned to France with his family. They live just outside Paris, but Bruno still dreams of someday going back to New York.
I would like to return to those towers. I would like to find again the ideal which is temporarily lost, to show that an ideal cannot be destroyed, that it remains alive, and that you can just rebuild it, improve it, and make it even greater. Like a challenge, a response, this is my dream.
Voilà, c'est ça mon rêve.